I'm Gary Bembridge. This is the fourth in my series of questions and answers around the whole cruising shutdown. And thanks for everybody who's sent in questions. In this particular episode, I'm going to focus on some very frequently asked questions that I'm getting. One of which is around insurance, the other's around what happens if you make a selection or you postpone a cruise and then the cruise line cancels. Also, I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happening with new ships and what to expect. And then very importantly, I'm getting asked a lot is how long do I think the shutdown's going to go for? So let's start first of all with insurance. I've been getting loads and loads of questions about insurance. I'm certainly not a financial expert. The only thing I would say that I have found also from my own experience and also the experiences that people are having, existing travel insurance and also certainly new policies do not seem to be covering the whole pandemic situation. So if you want to chop and change your cruise, cancel your cruise because of the whole thing that's going on at the moment, you'd like to find that your insurance will not cover that. I'm pretty much seeing that if you want to make changes or you want to make claims specifically related to the whole thing that's going on at the moment, you're probably going to find your insurance policy is not applicable. The critical thing I would say is, and I've said it in all the videos so far, is the best thing you can possibly do is hold on and wait until the cruise line cancels, because once the cruise line cancels, most of them will offer cash as an option. They'll offer much more generous terms in terms of extra onboard credit or various incentives. So wait as long as you can, hold your nerve if you possibly can. That leads me on to the next point. A lot of people have contacted me saying what they've done is they've got very nervous about travel, they've got very jittery, or parts of their group they're traveling with have got kind of nervous, and they've gone in and taken the offer where you can chop and change and cancel without a penalty, and they've been given some sort of future cruise credit. Then what's happened, as we've seen certainly in the last week that I've been recording this, is the cruise lines have then gone and cancelled cruises for a whole another month, and they've offered much better terms. Once you've actually made a decision, once you've got effectively a new arrangement with the cruise line, they will not give you those added perks if they cancel the cruise you're on. And some people have contacted me saying they decided to take the new offer. A day later, the cruise line cancelled their cruise and they didn't offer them the better terms. If you can, hold your nerve and wait until cruises are cancelled. The other thing, which is also sort of linked to that, is a lot of people have said, they've got perhaps cruises coming up in a couple of months' time, 60 to 90 days' time. Should they pay their final balance because they're worried about losing their deposit, but they also don't want to pay in and pay final balances? My point of view on that is, if you have any idea or concern that you're not going to do a cruise, is don't pay your final balance, except you're going to move your cruise into next year or whatever. But all of the cruise lines are offering that chance to move cruises with no penalty. Take that option now if you can. Now, some cruise lines are only doing that to the end of August at the moment. Some are doing it to the end of September. Some of them are doing it any time this year. But you have the opportunity to move your cruise. And certainly if you're nervous about paying a final deposit and you're wondering what's going to happen with that, you definitely shouldn't be doing that. That leads me on to the question, of course, and the decision that everyone has to make is, how long is the shutdown going to go on for? Now, at the time of recording this, all the cruise lines had moved their cruises into the middle of May, and the dates slightly differ. The cruise lines had also started to announce that the Alaska season was not going to start until July because Canada's closed all their ports until the end of June. So you then have to take a decision around when you think cruising is going to start up again. My personal view is it's a long way off. So although they've moved it to May, I do think that the cruise lines, what they're currently working on, is a month-by-month basis. That's partly because, as we know, everything's so uncertain at the moment. Also, when they do cancel cruises for a month, if you consider they've got weekly cruises going, they have ships of 2,000, 4,000, 5,000 people. The whole process of handling the volume of chops and changes and refunds is enormous. So going month to month is what they're doing. Why do I think that the shutdown is going to last for much longer? Well, first of all, you need to bear in mind, it's not really the cruise line's decision when cruising starts again. That is really going to be determined by government and government agencies. So you're going to need government agencies to agree to open ports for travels. They're also going to have to decide that ports are going to be open for embarkation and disembarkation. Also, you need, in the places that cruises are going to go to, you need the ports to be open. At this point in time, it's hard to see there's going to be a lot of enthusiasm for opening ports early. We've already seen, as I mentioned earlier, Canada's closed their ports already quite a while ago to July. New Zealand's closed into July. Australia in the last week have said they're not going to have any ships until at least the middle of June. And all of these places are still really locked down. It's hard to see governments and agencies actually releasing that and opening up really early, particularly in some countries where we're talking about lockdowns or severe restrictions, even domestically in your town and your home, lasting and spreading through to June. Another couple of big indicators I think we've seen is from the cruise lines themselves. In the last couple of days, before I recorded this, Carnival went out to the markets to raise $4 billion to help with liquidity. In the last video, if you watch that, I did talk about how they were not going to get a bailout. In my view, they were going to have to go out to the private sector. They've done that, and they're looking to raise $4 billion. That $4 billion, if you look at the submission they've made, is to help cover them right through for up to and into next year, at least in terms of liquidity. They've also, in that filing that they had to do for, I think it's the SEC in the US, there's a couple of really telling things. They make it very clear in there they have no idea about when governments are likely to lift restrictions. Secondly, they have no idea at this point in time about what requirements will be made for screening passengers, onboard procedures, and other restrictions that may come in place. They also made it pretty clear that there's going to be a combination over the next couple of weeks and months of ships they keep ready and active to go into service, and other ships that they're going to go into pretty much a real shutdown and a very skeleton crew. So they've indicated already, because the cost of running each ship for a month and keeping it ready to go is $1 or $2 million. So they're going to try and minimize some of those costs. So some of the ships are going to come out of service, it sounds like. Also, if we look at some other cruise lines, so for example, Saga here in the UK has indicated they've already looked at planning where they may have no cruising going right through for the next 6 months or so, based on where they think the government may or may not end up letting travel start again. We need to bear in mind that also there is a lot of restrictions heading into this shutdown around cruising. If you remember very specifically, most of the major governments, I think the US, the UK, Australia, so the big markets linked to cruising, they all made it clear that people over 70 shouldn't go on cruises at all, and that advice is still in place. We have no idea when that's going to come off, but certainly if I look at the UK here, the advice is still for people to stay at home if you're over 70 or in the vulnerable category, still at least June at the moment. That may change, it may get shorter, it may get longer. It's hard to see them lifting that restriction on people certainly 70 plus until there's more immunity, until there's vaccines. So it's hard to see those restrictions lifting quite quickly. Ports opening, travel advisory opening, cruise lines being ready to go, airlines ready to move passengers about. So my sense is that it's going to last for longer, and I think definitely certainly longer than the May period. I think it's going to be very, very challenging. So that's one of the things I'm saying is, if you can, hold on and wait. But if you're pretty sure that you are going to want to cruise, at least push it to the later in the year, maybe push it into next year if you're worried about that deadline coming to pay your final balance. You probably don't want to be paying off for final balance at this point in time. And I'm guessing pretty sure with the amount of capacity that's going to be available, which is again what Carnival Corporation referred to, that they're expecting lots of capacity, people will be slow to come back. If it opens up much earlier, the cruise lines are going to be very, very happy for you to pull bookings forward. That's my view. So certainly I think that we're looking at a longer period before cruising is going to be able to start up again. And I think the cruise lines are indicating that. Certainly they're now doing it on a month-to-month basis. And I guess we're all living pretty much a month-to-month, week-to-week basis to see what's going to happen. I've had a lot of questions also therefore linked to that about what do I think is going to happen with river cruising. My message on river cruising is pretty much the same. And the advantage that river cruising companies have, in my view, is they're used to closing down for a couple of months a year. So they closed down at the end of the season last year. They put all their ships into storage, the crew go home. So their running costs are pretty low. Obviously they have lots of fixed costs with head office, etc. But their ships are already kind of storage, closed down and shut down. And so they have perhaps less difficulty because they don't have to shut down ships as Ocean do. They have much more time to perhaps think about it and go up and running. Some of the cruise lines have already pushed that into July, like Avalon. Many of them are now talking into May as well. I again think that we will see river cruising starting up at a much slower pace and much later in the year as well. So I think river cruising in Europe, if you look at what's happening in some of the key countries in Europe, it's very, very challenging. And also as we come out of the lockdown, some of the governments of Europe are talking about the way of ending some of the lockdown process is once they can do antibody testing, so they're actually more clear about who can start moving around. So I think it's quite a complex situation as the governments look to release and get things moving again. And I think cruising is going to fall, in my view, unfortunately, lower down the priorities when it comes to getting travel moving and kicking off again. I've been asked by many, many people who have booked on maiden voyages, because people love going on maiden voyages, for the many ships that are due to come, what I think is going to happen. All of the major shipyards have slowed down, closed down, and already a couple of companies have been very clear. Like I've seen some announcements this week from P&O with Iona. I've seen Saga make an announcement, in fact today that I'm recording it, that their ship is delayed. So all of those big shipyards are struggling to meet things. So I think if you're booked on a maiden voyage, I think it's pretty certain that that's not going to happen. And I guess over the next coming weeks and months, we will start to see some of those being cancelled and moved around and reshuffled. We've seen Carnival with some of their planned big revamps of ships to relaunch ships. They would announce that those aren't going to happen for a very long time. Hopefully that's answered some of your questions. I know some of this has perhaps been a little bit downbeat, and you may have a completely different view. You may think that I'm being too conservative, too pessimistic about when I think cruising is going to start again. Of course, I love cruising. I'm very excited about when things go back to normal, we can start cruising again. I just think that it's going to take much longer. If you have any questions or thoughts, or you want my opinion, please feel free to send those in. I have lots of people who hate cruising watching these videos. I have people who love cruising, people who are interested in cruising watching those. Please, if you are going to leave comments, it's great to have a debate, but let's try and be as civil and as friendly as we possibly can and have a good, healthy and good discussion. So until then, stay home, stay safe, and keep dreaming about the days when we can go of traveling and cruising the world again.